Hello, dear friends. Today we'll continue exploring the memoirs of a German non-commissioned officer. Don't forget to rate this video and share your thoughts in the comments. And now, let's begin. It's a strange war being waged here, with strong points and armed convoys, small-scale surprise raids and no clear front line, with paratroopers being dropped and low-level air attacks. Overall, it's rather lackluster, even though neither side has staged any impressive spectacle. It seems that the Russians can't, and we don't want to. A wagtail had settled in the cradle of a heavy artillery piece from the battery we were unloading. At 2 o'clock, I returned to the empty train bound for Smolensk and Minsk, according to my travel orders. I settled down in the straw, which smelled of horses. From Vyazma, I traveled in a German car with a vestibule. I arrived in Smolensk 24 hours later. At 9 o'clock, I found Henning. It wasn't easy. First, I walked through the backyard of the workshop, then through the garden. At the far end, I saw someone standing there with a hand shielding their eyes. It was a grand reunion. On June 11th at 11 o'clock, I set off for Minsk. I reached the airfield in a Mercedes belonging to the film studio. I couldn't drive right up to the plane, but an airfield vehicle gave me a ride. Later, I transferred to a truck and by 6 o'clock in the evening was taken to the Todt organization camp between Orsha and Borisov. A clean room, a well with clear, ice-cold water, and 20 minutes later I happened to catch a performance by a Russian theater troupe that called itself Goodbye. The end of our first year. It isn't particularly memorable for us. We mention it almost in passing with a half smile. There's no reason to be happy, nor any reason to be sad. A day like any other. It isn't worth talking about. We are part of this war. It is a natural phenomenon. It was born and grew, and when it runs dry, it will die. At first, we carried it with us. Now, however, the war carries us. We started it, but in the end, it entered us and made us its puppets. It has burned much within us, and it will continue to strip this away from us until it forces us to be reborn. It is useless to fight this. One must not look back, for that will only bring sorrow and leave bitterness in the heart. There is only one thing left to do, to surrender one's soul to this force and make peace with it. It is even stronger. But this too will pass, like rain. June 30th, 1942. For 8 days I have been wandering across the country, from hopeless areas to more prosperous ones, and from prosperous ones to those where everything is truly well as such places can be during wartime. There is hardly a mode of transportation, whether by road or rail, that I have not used. At first, it was as if life had come to a standstill. Freight trains crawled through the countryside, and then it took a military convoy 7 hours to cover 60 kilometers. The landscape outside the window was always the same. How tired I've grown of these muddy roads. It's become unbearable to look at them. The rain, the ankle-deep mud, the villages, all looking the same. I don't even want to know their names. And then there are those small, dreadful towns, where the only paved road leads to the station and nowhere else. Even if I wanted to do something about it, it would only make sense in peacetime. Things got better on the way to Smolensk. I spread some straw on the floor of an open freight car. The sun was shining, and I slept comfortably on my straw mattress. That was the evening I found Henning. I looked at the wonderful icons during my last visit to the church. Other than that, there wasn't much else to see in the city reduced to ruins. A city that once housed one of the largest universities, as well as 34 high schools and a technical college. Services are now being held in the church again, after a 5-year hiatus. Apart from that, what else can be said about Smolensk? Certain scenes linger in one's mind if you pay closer attention to them. Immigrants, refugees, women and children with bundles on their backs. There were hundreds of them, moving in disorderly columns, while above their heads a loudspeaker suddenly blared out solemn, deafening music. Here, a face with regular features would emerge. There, clean-shaven heads would peek out from snow-white shirts, cinched with narrow belts and tucked into knickerbockers. Occasionally, a modestly dressed, beautiful young woman would walk down the road without glancing to the right or left. Such scenes are exceptions, but they give one pause for thought. As I was driving to the airfield, we came across a column of prisoners, yesterday's soldiers in a state of apathy, with the haggard gaze of the defeated. On the other side of the street, women stood weeping. You don't see tears very often. As a rule, they are not part of the Russian character. Henning told me a story that illustrates this point. They had a woman who worked as a cleaner, and her brother helped her. The brother committed a theft and was caught. After a summary trial, he was shot. The woman wasn't told about it, but she knew. When someone once asked her about Vasily, she said, "Vasily stole." She considered the harsh punishment perfectly natural and shrugged. Later, when someone told her, "Be careful, don't steal," she calmly replied, "It's okay. It's war. It's war. So many people are dying." I wandered the streets, gazing at the girls, the bustle of the squares, and the numerous churches. Sometimes I would sit down on a bench in the park where children were playing. Once I got into a horse-drawn carriage to get a better look at the city. There was something surreal about being a guest, a stranger in a city that already felt foreign. There was a diner where a Russian waiter asked in German, "Beer, sir?" Every time, he set a new shot of vodka in front of me. Then there was a chapel above the passageway under the arch with the Black Madonna. On major holidays, she is dressed in stiff, shiny golden robes, and candles are lit around her to greet the bustling crowds below. After a grueling journey, I arrived in Minsk on a train carrying ammunition at 2:30 in the morning. At 3:30, I climbed over the fence and met my old comrade Julius from the Thugs Company. At breakfast, he ate half a pound of butter, 3/4 of a pound of blood sausage, and 7 fried eggs. I doubt I could have managed all that. In the afternoon, I set off for Borisov, where 10 hours of sleep helped me regain my strength after the exhausting journey and the chill I'd felt in my head. I settled into a small, clean house where I'd stayed once before. That was during the offensive. I'd stopped there then to wash up after the trip, and I'd really liked the house. At first, the family wasn't particularly pleased with my return visit, but after a while, shy smiles appeared on the hosts' faces, and we began to trust one another. The family consisted of a quiet, timid woman, a wrinkled grandmother, and a young girl who was 14 years old. It's quite simple if you proceed cautiously, showing friendliness toward people and trying to push the war aside. As if one thing ruled out the other. At the soldiers' barracks in South, I was waiting for a postal courier from Berlin. It was pouring rain outside. It was a relief after the stifling heat of the past few days. Last night was so stifling that I was sweating from every pore. A land of extremes. There is no moderation in anything. Heat and cold, dust and dirt. Everything is frenzied and unbridled. Shouldn't one expect the people here to be the same? Several Russian policemen were sitting at my table, young Ukrainians from Galicia. Some of them were still wearing their brown greatcoats with brass buttons bearing the hammer and sickle emblem. Others wore German military uniforms without insignia and Russian belt straps. Such an absurd hodgepodge. But they're good guys, brave, desperate, and full of hatred. Just what we need. There were many destroyed buildings in the city. The Bolsheviks had burned down all the houses, only their skeletons remained. Some had been destroyed by bombing, but in many cases they had been set on fire. Now the buildings have been restored. Roofs, floors, walls, staircases, windows, doors, balconies, everything has been renovated. Major workshops and supply companies must have good facilities for the winter. July 12, 1942. Back with the old crew. How pleasant it was for me to see the little valley with the river and the good old dugouts on the hillside again. "So, you've arrived," the battery commander remarked. "We were wondering if something had happened to you." And I felt like a prodigal son. It's probably hard to understand, but even on the last stretch of the journey, I had the feeling that I was returning home. Along the way there was a large mine crater, burned-out trucks, shell craters to the right and left of the railroad tracks, a downed plane, a sloping road, the final loading point, and, finally, the shack of the train loading commander. All of this was so familiar as the noise of the front at night, as familiar as the light from the dugouts off to the side of the road. Now I felt at ease again. I had heard from reports that something was happening in our sector, that we had to straighten our line of defense to avoid being surrounded, and that worried me. But it turned out that everything was fine. Nothing had changed. The only news was that Buddy had been wounded, promoted to sergeant, awarded the Iron Cross First Class, and sent home on leave. The guys gathered in my dugout. The light of the pale evening sky streamed through the gauze curtains on the window, and I was reading. I received a letter from Yo, who is in the south, and another from Martin, he's in the north. I was deeply moved. How scattered my friends had become, across all the theaters of war, in Norway, on the Leningrad front, in Army Group Center, in the Donetsk Basin, in southern France, in Greece and Africa, on the coasts, on the occupied islands, in the deserts, in the steppes and forests, among snow-capped mountains, and within the walls of foreign cities. And yet they speak with one voice. Their hearts beat in unison. Here's what Martin writes. I can picture him drinking and pounding his fist on the table. If only we could start living again and keep doing our work. I still haven't given up on my dreams. We'll make them come true eventually. I found some beautiful icons. That's for the future. But right now I'm pretty drunk. And here's Yo, sitting by his house and writing about these strange times. A straw sways in the wind on a spiderweb hanging from the eaves. The cat, Peter Jr., is sitting on the edge of a chair in the sunshine. It's Sunday morning now, past 7 o'clock. A faint, bluish wisp of smoke rises from the kitchen and drifts among the trees, and the clouds cast enormous shadows over the surrounding landscape. It's wonderful. A combination of soft blue, white, yellow, and pink. That's the palette of colors I'm living in right now. I suppose this is a reward for the terrible first half of May when the tanks broke through here. We repelled the attack on the power plant twice, and the valley was so black with smoke that you couldn't even see the sky. Our cemetery with its crosses is getting bigger and bigger, and when all the commotion and confusion die down, I once again have the sad duty of carving letters onto white wooden boards. Now they've turned gray beneath the overhanging irises. So writes Yo. Here by the battery, a light rain is drizzling under the evening sun. The air is very clear, and soft light falls on the grass. I just took a deep breath. There are flowers on the slope of our dugout, just as there are on the table inside it.
The dugout is bright and cozy, like a small living room. 350 Russians have broken through and are advancing somewhere through the countryside. By evening, gunshots could be heard in the rear. The sentry shifts have been doubled, but none of this can disturb the peace of the Lord God. I've been at the observation post since yesterday. I headed to the old observation post to see how the terrain had changed. I wandered across a meadow, white with yarrow and daisies, and stumbled upon a sunny slope covered with wild strawberries. I stayed there so long that my comrades began to worry, but I just couldn't tear myself away. My craving for wild strawberries was incredible. There they were, red, ripe, and plump. All I had to do was hold out my hand and fill my mouth. I tossed my cap and belt aside and bent down to pick them. Soon my hands were red from the juice. Then I headed for position L. Many new shell craters had appeared, and the dugout had taken a direct hit.
As I approached, I heard the din of fierce fighting. The next moment I saw a group of our guys in their steel helmets whirling around in a frenzied dance, throwing hand grenades. All in all, it was a fantastic sight. It seemed as though they were using every conceivable means to throw the Russians into confusion. As it turned out, the division commander had arrived at position L, and it was he who was consulting at the company headquarters about whether to risk advancing further. Our men had set up a Russian machine gun and were firing it at the Russians' own platoon position. The Russians were disappointed that our division commander hadn't fallen into the trap. With great caution, they attached a tripwire to the mine, hoping that a German general would trip over it and be blown up by the mine. But now they've detonated it themselves and, while they were at it, set the shed on fire. When the big man left, it immediately became quiet. We laughed, saying that the big guns had fallen silent. It's midnight now. I'm sitting here writing by candlelight. Machine guns are rattling outside, and behind me someone is shouting in his sleep. 10 more rounds! Fire! What's the vertical elevation? 7,100! Then he turned over with a sigh. Not far away, if you go outside, you can see flashes above the new front line, which has encircled a large area. We're here, comrades. In August 1942, the Russians launched a powerful offensive in the central sector, particularly on Rzhev. It began at an inopportune moment, since several armored divisions of Army Group South, having reached Maykop in the foothills of the Caucasus, were, ironically, forced to halt due to a shortage of fuel. At the same time, they had to frantically reinforce the defenses along the Atlantic coast following the Canadian landing at Dieppe. During the fierce battle that ensued, the division in which Pabst served was recalled to provide support to another German force, which had been pinned down by Russian actions. Rain. It's been raining day and night. The wooden deck in front of our house squelches, sinking beneath our feet into puddles. But there's one advantage to this. We aren't called out on patrol. The flies have quieted down too. The flies that spread dirt on everything and everyone and swarm up in clouds the moment you take off the clothes hanging on the wall by the stove. The evening is very calm. A light mist has settled over the lowlands, and the roofs of the houses seem to float in the pale light. Somewhere a cart creaks, horses stamp their hooves in their stalls, and the clinking of chains can be heard. All around there is silence and stillness, as if the front were catching its breath for a while. You sit here in the blockhouse, far from all the turmoil, amid marshy forests, between machine gun emplacements, each connected to the next by a narrow wooden walkway. The sentries are silent. They try not to take any risks. There's too much of all sorts of riffraff lurking in the woods. We had to shoot our way through the forest, creating a sort of passage, the necessary space between the enemy and us. It's a completely different world, and I'm grateful for that. In times like these, the front is the best place to be. It's not that there's always a lot to do here. Sometimes there's very little, and you have to learn to be alone with yourself. I like that. At the front, you're incredibly free. Free from petty worries and hassles, from the inevitable, clinging things you can't do anything about. Just as a military order is short and precise, and there's no doubt about the feasibility of our task, there are no problems with matters outside of our daily duties. Apart from a few things we all have in common, such as the desire to return home someday and thoughts of those we love, we forget about everything else. We have no time to think about anything else or get involved in other matters. Here I can wander through the forest, feeling nothing but bliss in the green twilight after the blinding sun of a clear day. I can sit by the monumental entrance to my blockhouse, enjoying the scent of resin and the warmth of a sunny day, which fills the forest with great waves of the scent of meadows. The malaise of our time can be boiled down to a few simple truths. It occurs to me that one can reflect on this much better here, away from the noise of everyday life, when peaceful contemplation isn't interrupted by thoughts tied to desires. And here we are free even from desires. They have become too meaningless in the face of tomorrow's uncertainty. Nothing stands between us and the grandeur of the unfolding events. Around 2 a.m., someone burst in shouting, "Wake up!" By 3 o'clock, the main marching column was already moving along the dark, marshy roads, through the swamp with its rising mists, and across the landscape of flat hills and dark villages. I am always struck by this landscape, with its vastness and the immense scope of its real boundaries. That morning, there was nothing but the dark ribbon of the road, the green of the meadow, almost as dark in the cold light. A barely perceptible mist drifted between the hills, and the villages, too, drifted on its crests. There is neither variety nor charm. The same austere tone prevailed throughout, so that a lone horseman could be swallowed up by it, and yet remain visible from afar as a distinct figure. A gun carriage had become stuck in the mud, and for a time there was nothing among the hills but a group of artillerymen, the horse handlers, tow ropes, and hoisting devices surrounding the hapless gun carriage, accompanied by the loud, resolute cry of, "1, 2, lift!" The battery stretched out along the road. From the hills, we could see the vehicles moving forward along their path, climbing the incline or rounding a bend. Then came the usual drill for loading onto the train. Shoulder to shoulder, perfectly coordinated. Then we rolled off in an easterly direction. During the numerous stops, we chatted or good-naturedly bickered, and laughter rang out from car to car. I slept a little on the haystack under our wagon. We were glad of the sunshine during this interlude, when we could sleep, when everything was prepared and we were simply being transported to where we were needed. We grumbled about this work, the upheaval, the new relocation, because human nature is prone to laziness and staying in one place. But we've already accepted it and put it behind us. Soon we'll be setting up new positions, not for the first time, nor the last. We'll do what's required, and soon we'll feel at home again. It doesn't take much, since we're essentially nomads. Then we'll be living in the present again, and all of this will be just another episode from the past. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now, everyone. See you next time.